Hello, I'm People's Historian Daniel Gray. This mural depicts the last survivor of the Gretna Rail Disaster. Today I'm going to tell you the full story. Early on the morning of May the 22nd, 1915, 500 troops boarded a train here at Larbert. They were members of the Leith battalion of the Royal Scots, bound for Gallipoli via Liverpool. They'd been training at nearby Stenhouse Muir. They were due to go 24 hours earlier, but their carrier ship had run aground on Merseyside. As the lads boarded the 17 carriages here, they would have been full of the usual fears of conflict in a foreign country. What they weren't to know is that many of them would never even leave Scotland. With the soldiers on board, the troop train thundered south. At around 6:45 in the morning near Gretna at Quinton's Hill, the signalman allowed a local train to park on the southbound line. That was to allow an express train heading north to go by. At 6:49, the troop train ploughed into the local train. It fell onto the northbound track. The express train clattered into the wreckage within a minute later. 215 yards of train had been squashed into just 67 yards. What was worse was that the gas underneath the train caught fire. Fire spread rapidly. It was a horrific, vile fire. It was to result in Britain's worst ever rail disaster. There was little chance of anyone escaping. The signalman, George Tinsley, had somehow forgotten to put out the warning signal that the troop train could have heeded and prevented the tragedy. The consequences were beyond catastrophic. 216 of the Leith men were killed, some in the crash, some in the fire. Many were unidentifiable, some were cremated on the scene. Another 246 were injured, and when a roll call was held at 4 p.m, only 65 of the battalion were still standing. The bodies were laid out in the fields around the tracks, covered in white sheets. Locals ran to the rescue, but to no avail. A further 11 people were killed on the other trains. A total 227 made the Quinton's Hill disaster the worst in British Rail's history. Those troops that could be identified were brought back home to Leith in their drill hall in Dalmeny Street. Their coffins were placed across the floor that filled the room. In a horrific footnote, 4 bodies were left at the crash site, those of 4 children. On one coffin were written the words, "Little girl, unidentifiable." On the other, 3 trunks, probably children. They were taken to Glasgow but never identified, never claimed. Back here in Edinburgh, this had become Leith's tragedy. Hundreds gathered outside the drill hall to hear news of loved ones. It was said that no family in Leith was unaffected by the disaster. The men that died at Gretna were often young. Very often they were from Leith too, 149 of the whole 216. Nowhere summed that group up more than this street, Albert Street. From number 22, William Barrett, aged 24, and Rob Swan, aged 19. At number 23, George and Henry Macaulay, aged 22 and 24, and David Angus, aged 32. At number 31, John Cumming, aged 17. Number 66, George Wilson, aged 19. At number 73, Michael Gaffney, aged 17. At 134, George Simpson, aged 25. At 136, George Houliston, aged 18. At 148, Robert Gibb, aged 21. At number 89, Peter Campbell, aged 20. At 95, Robert Brunton, aged 26. At 174, William West, aged 18. Brothers, pals, Albert Street must have wept for months. "101 of the coffins were taken from the drill hall on Dalmeny Street, and a procession took place along here, up Leith Walk, and turn right into Pilrig Street where the church is." The coffin procession was heading for Rosebank Cemetery. 3,500 soldiers lined the streets. Many more members of the public were here too. Shop shutters were pulled down. The whole thing took 3 to 4 hours. Must have been a disturbing, awful thing to watch. When the coffins arrived here at Rosebank Cemetery, a private funeral was held. The authorities didn't want news of the disaster to break out. It would be bad for morale. It was also said that the authorities had bought up the negatives from those people who had taken photographs at the crash site. The men were buried here, 3 deep. On each layer, a large Union Jack was placed over the coffins. 3 shots were fired into the air, and after 3 hours, the last salute was played. There's a strange, almost macabre disappointment in the fact that the men didn't get to war, though Gallipoli of course was a deathbed in itself. But my biggest feeling is that one of waste. There are many more sides to this story, of course. It wasn't just Leith's disaster. Young men from Musselburgh, Portobello and elsewhere were killed, making it Edinburgh's disaster really. And what of the survivors, not least the 62 who carried on to Liverpool? But more than that, I have a feeling of horror at the abject waste of that generation of people from Leith and elsewhere. They were brave enough to put themselves forward for a battle in a faraway land. If they could have taken that courage through their lives, who knows what they could have achieved? We'll never know.